This is probably one of the coolest things I've ever had a chance to do. I feel so lucky. This is just a dream come true. You know, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbed Mount Everest the year I was born, so there's a bit of a connection that way. And I've interviewed Edmund Hillary a couple of times over the years, and he's a real hero of mine. And this part of the world has just always held some sort of magic sway. I couldn't ever imagine that I'd actually get here. So this is a thrill of a lifetime to be able to walk with the Sherpa, to be able to trek in the Himalayas and stand at the base of Mount Everest is just amazing. It's more a pilgrimage than a walk through the highest mountains in the world to Mount Everest Base Camp. It is one of the greatest journeys on this planet. And it's why I've come to Nepal. Mount Everest is the highest place on the planet. It rises over 29,000 feet and sits right on the border between Nepal and Chinese Tibet. The first attempts to climb Mount Everest came from the Tibetan side in the 1920s. But when Nepal finally opened its borders to foreigners in 1950, it became the successful route to the top. In 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay were the first to reach the summit. Even though the mountain has been conquered over 1,000 times since then, Everest retains its magnetism.
So, you want to take? If you get...
If you're smart enough, I'll just get him to do that. I'm here with a team of mountaineers led by Ben Webster, who are making a documentary for Discovery Channel about what it's like to climb Everest. Their goal is the top of the world, almost 9 kilometers above sea level. My goal is base camp at 17,600 feet, and that seems like plenty, certainly higher than I've ever been in my life. Nepal is a small country of phenomenal geography, including 8 of the 10 highest mountains. It's sandwiched between India and China, and it's one of the poorest countries in the world. Most Nepalis are farmers, and the average per capita income is $250 US a year. Since a Maoist insurgency began in 1999, the political situation has been dangerous and unstable. Most trips to Nepal begin in the capital of Kathmandu. It's so tiny. I will spend 5 days here before heading up into the mountains. There's a medieval feel to this city. This place is crazy. I mean, I sort of think it's like a Bruegel painting with cars and motorcycles in it. It's what you imagine like jolly old England would have been in the 1600s. This is, you know, life in the raw. This is the wild entrepreneurial spirit before stores got all sanitized and people did their business in offices. This is just everything hanging out on the street. Kathmandu is sensory overload, hypnotic, horrifying, intoxicating, and exhausting, with temples and tuk-tuks and sacred cows. And for a city of only 700,000 people, which is puny by Asian standards, smog is off the charts. You can't even see the mountains. Rush hour in Kathmandu gives you some idea of the problems they're facing. The streets are way too narrow. There are way too many cars. The fuel they use is poor. As a result, the emissions are horrible. You can barely breathe. The air quality is awful. It is so dirty. But the smog doesn't make the city any less amazing. Travel to Nepal boomed in the 60s when the hippies came looking for cheap drugs and the meaning of life. They hung around in a neighborhood called Tamil. It's a bit more commercial now, but the tourists still come here to email, eat, and shop. Everything is incredibly cheap. You can buy a CD for $3 US and silver and turquoise bracelets for $5. You can even outfit an Everest expedition. Discovery expedition leader and veteran Everest climber, Ben Webster, is an old hand at this, so I asked him to take me shopping. So, is there actually decent equipment you can buy here? Is this knockoffs or used stuff?
Well, we're headed to some shots that'll have some reputable. We'll have some good gear anyway. Anyway, stuff up here. This would all be knockoffs, and most of the shops you'll see will be knockoff stuff coming from China, or they do stuff here in Nepal.
Does that mean it's not good enough to make it up the mountain?
I wouldn't trust it, personally.
All right.
But for a lot of people that come on trekking trips and that kind of thing, there's a lot of independent travelers that come to Nepal, right? And this stuff is really cheap, and if you were traveling, say, through Southeast Asia, you'd have t-shirts and shorts and all that stuff, and then you wanted to go for a walk in the mountains. Well, it's easier to outfit here. Get something that may not be the best in the world, but for $100 you can be outfitted completely and have a walk in the hill.
But let's face it, there are way better things to buy than hiking boots. This is what everybody buys when they come to Kathmandu. These are the pashmina shawls, cashmere, that are made from the hair of the Himalayan mountain goat. And they are so soft. Some of them are mixed with silk, maybe cheap. $15 US, $40 US. The really soft, thick, gorgeous ones might even cost $120 US. I think I bought every color of the rainbow, but who could resist? As fabulous as the bargains are, and they are fabulous, there is more to life than shopping. These Buddhist monks are not buying pashminas. Hey, you guys. So do you think this is a crazy place?
Yeah.
It's not peaceful. How can you meditate here? How can you be religious, peaceful, quiet man in this crazy place?
That's a crazy place. We not, not meditation.
You're not monks?
We live,
Actually,
You're monks.
but this time we were studying.
You're studying to be
No
monks.
time to meditating.
Nepal is the world's only Hindu kingdom, though there are many Buddhists in this country and the religions coexist well. Kathmandu is full of wonderful and ancient temples, but I've been told not to miss the huge temple complex to the Hindu god Shiva called Pashupatinath. This is Nepal's holiest of holy sites for Hindu pilgrims who come here. It is an extraordinary enclave of temples and shrines filled with half-naked sadhus, some who live in caves on the side of the river, and people who come here for ritual bathing. The most powerful part of the temple is on the river. There are platforms, which are called ghats, beside the water, where people are cremated. It's an extraordinary sight to behold the constant swirl of activity, building fires and then sweeping them away. Grieving families, preparing bodies, and lighting the funeral pyres. It's a bit gruesome to Western eyes, but it's mesmerizing and moving to see the cycle of life and death up close. This river is all about death and purification. They say to die and be cremated here on the Bagmati, which is a tributary of the Ganges, is a very fortunate thing, might end the cycle of rebirths. Now, the ghats you see behind me are reserved for the lower caste people who can't afford to spend very much money. Families are mourning there now. And then the further upriver you go are the ghats for rich people, VIPs, and ultimately the Nepalese royal family. When the Nepalese royal family was massacred in 2001, they had to build an extra royal ghat to accommodate the king, queen, and prince. The cremations were carried live on TV. Non-Hindus are not allowed inside the temple, but Pashupatinath is a powerful and vibrant world to visit. 20 minutes from this massive Hindu temple is Nepal's largest Buddhist structure, which is called a stupa. For me, this will be the lasting image of this trip. Buddha's eyes looking out in 4 directions under a golden spire. It's magnificent and very spiritual. It's one of the largest stupas in the world, and it's the most important Tibetan Buddhist monument outside of Tibet. You see Buddha's searching blue eyes looking over the city of Kathmandu, and above that rise the 13 steps to Nirvana. This is the Bodha Stupa, dating from the 14th century. It's at the center of a thriving Tibetan community on the outskirts of Kathmandu. And here, locals spin the prayer wheels and shuffle clockwise around this monument, along with the tourists. People still come here to pray before a trip to the Himalaya. I collect my thoughts. Tomorrow, I'm off to the world's highest mountain range. After a 30-minute flight from Kathmandu, I arrive in the small mountain village of Lukla. It's the greatest flight I ever had. I've escaped from the shimmering heat and smog of the city into the pristine Himalaya mountains. The word Himalaya means abode of snow in Sanskrit. These pilots have to be really skilled to be able to navigate the high passes and narrow valleys where clouds and winds shift in a moment, and then land on a runway not much longer than an aircraft carrier. We had a thrilling flight in from Kathmandu this morning in a Twin Otter Canadian-built aircraft, the workhorse of this area, landing on the airstrip you see behind me, which is a little scary because it's so short and so steep into the mountain. It was built by Edmund Hillary. It was only paved 4 years ago. They tidied it up and removed all the crashed aircraft. But up until this airstrip was built, you had to walk into this area. There was no other way to get here. Almost all Everest expeditions start in Lukla, which is at 9,383 feet above sea level. The air here is magnificent, and the surrounding hills are terraced and brilliant green. I'll spend one night here before beginning my trek up to base camp. Everyone's warning me about altitude sickness, which can kill you. Some people are affected, others aren't. I'm not feeling anything yet, but tonight I will start taking Diamox and Ginkgo biloba. Both of these help alleviate altitude sickness. We'll also ascend very slowly to give our bodies time to acclimatize. When I was putting, my credit card and money and stuff like that in the safety deposit box at the hotel in Kathmandu this morning, I was looking at it thinking, when I come back, when I hold this again, I'll have been there. Imagine the adventures I'll have had. So the trek begins. I hope I don't get sick. In fact, I've got a little bit of a tummy bug right now. I hope that goes away. I hope I don't get altitude sickness. I think other than that, I'm going to make it. I think I'm fit enough, and that will happen. But it's sure a dream. You have to keep reminding yourself that the journey is the destination. If you don't make it, you're still lucky to have seen what you see. But I really want to make it. This is the journey ahead of me. We'll walk about 43 kilometers up through the fabled Khumbu Valley, home of the Sherpa people. The elevation will rise from just over 9,000 feet to almost 18,000 feet at Everest Base Camp. We'll pass through famous Sherpa towns like Namche Bazaar and Tengboche. I'm hoping all those squats and lunges I did at the gym before I came pay off. It's a perfect morning with a clear blue sky. And fortified with a breakfast of champions, oatmeal porridge and milk tea, I set off. This is where the trail to Everest begins. You leave Lukla and pass through this memorial gate to Pasang Lamu, who is the first Sherpa woman to climb Mount Everest. She died on the descent. They say her oxygen perhaps failed, but they have a beautiful memorial gate that you pass through, and then the trail begins. Hey, Lakpa, come on. No problem, eh? There are a few crucial rules of the road. Always pass a fully loaded yak or zopkio on the uphill side.
Their horns are sharp and their hips are broad, and they do not understand the right of way because, of course, it's always theirs. A Zopkio is a cross between a yak and a cow, and they're daintier than yaks and better tempered. The Sherpas are devout Buddhists, and there are religious monuments everywhere. Chortens, stupas, and carved mani stones. You always respectfully pass them on the left. The trail follows along the beautiful Dudkosi River, which is fed by the Himalayan glaciers and eventually meets up with the mighty Ganges and flows to the ocean. Now, crossing this river can take some courage on a swinging suspension bridge, especially with a yak train headed for you.
This is the entrance to Sagarmatha National Park, which was created in 1976 with the help of the New Zealand government, made a World Heritage Site in 1979 in recognition of the cultural importance of the Sherpa people and because Mount Everest is up there. And of course, the Nepalese name for Everest is Sagarmatha. Trail continues. Watch out for altitude. Go slowly. Avoid getting sick.
The name for Everest in Nepalese is Sagarmatha, Mother of the Universe. The Tibetan and Sherpa name for the mountain is Chomolungma, Goddess Mother of the World. The national park has been really helpful in saving this amazing place from more deforestation. We've been on the trail for a day and a half. We'll stop for some water, catch our breath, and psychologically prepare ourselves for the 2,000-foot gain in altitude this afternoon as we climb to the Sherpa capital, Namche Bazaar.
For the last 2 days, we've been hiking in from Lukla. It has been magnificent through pine forests and past rhododendron and waterfalls. The final little push that we just did to get to the place we are now, Namche Bazaar, is a well-known hill, but it was a magnificent ending to find ourselves here. We're about 11,500 feet in this main Sherpa town.
Namche Bazaar is a town with blue-roofed houses and everything a trekker could want. Hot showers, email, pizza, and cool hats. It's also a very good place to rest and let your body adjust to the lower oxygen levels.
We are acclimatizing here for a few days, trying to drink lots of water and get used to this so that we avoid mountain sickness.
Water is key for the body's adjustment to altitude, and I'm trying to drink about 8 liters a day, and I carry my water bottle with me everywhere. If you're lucky, your rest days in Namche are over a weekend because the Sherpa Market is something to see.
This is the scene at the famous Namche Bazaar. Saturday morning is market day here, and it's this fabulous scene of humanity trading, because this always was a trading center, and this is the main Sherpa village. And people trudge up the hill to get here early in the morning with their baskets filled with whatever they can sell and make some money off, whether it's yak ribs or fresh eggs or some wonderful spice, or even Pringles potato chips.
Some of these vendors have walked for a week, hauling their goods up the back-breaking 600-meter Namche Hill in order to make it to the market.
Namaste. How much? 150 rupees. $2. My name's Pringle. Do you care? But this looks good, eh? Mount Everest whiskey. Top of the world. Produced in Nepal. Whiskey, chips. I'll take the chips.
Now that I'm stocked up on Pringles and rested and more acclimatized, it's time to walk the day-long trail from Namche to the monastery town of Tengboche. In my opinion, this scenery is the most beautiful of the journey, maybe even in the world. For its massive size, Everest is remarkably shy. The glimpses you get along the route are tantalizing and thrilling, but they're way fewer than you'd think. I thought since it's the tallest mountain, it would stick out. But no, it's obscured by other mountains. Bill Tillman, the legendary mountaineer and explorer, considered this the grandest 30 miles of the Himalaya and said, I felt like I could go on like this forever, that life had little better to offer than to march day after day in an unknown country to an unattainable goal. Amen. I'll spend 2 nights in Tengboche so my body can continue to acclimatize. This also gives me the opportunity to soak in the scenery and visit the monastery that sits on a ridge at 12,700 feet in the most magnificent and spiritual setting.
This is one of the most beautiful and magical places you'll ever see. I mean, many people end their trek here. They make a pilgrimage to Tengboche and feel that that is done. And then the centerpiece is this beautiful monastery, which was built in 1916. It was destroyed in 1934 by an earthquake, and again in 1989 when they put electricity in there. They think it caused a fire, so it's been rebuilt and rebuilt. Beautifully ornate inside.
This morning, we're up at 5:30 to attend a Puja, a special ceremony for anyone attempting to climb Mount Everest. It's particularly important for the Sherpa climbers who are Buddhist. The Lama chants and the monks play their instruments as prayers are recited. Everyone has a chance to light a butter candle and reflect. It's strange, exotic, and beautiful. Finally, we place our money offerings inside a white kata scarf that's inscribed with Buddhist sayings, and the Lama places it around our necks with a blessing and a red string for good luck. The kata scarf is very precious. You don't stick it in your backpack with your dirty socks. We emerge into the bright sunshine twice blessed. Blessed by the Lama and blessed to be here.
Can you hear the yak bells? A little tiny bit of wind. This place is phenomenal. Ama de Blam, the mountain behind me, is considered the most beautiful mountain in the world. And we've had, glimpses as we've come up of Everest with the plume coming off it. You're a little bit nervous when you start, if you'll be okay, if you'll be able to handle it. A couple of steep climbs into the town of Namche Bazaar and into Tengboche here, we were kind of warned about. But, you take a Sherpa's pace or a yak pace, slowly, trudging, certainly huffing and puffing, which I am, and occasionally gulping for air. I'm breathing faster, but I don't have a headache, I'm lucky. And you're like a chapter out of Pilgrim's Progress. The way is called adversity, and then triumph. And you do it, and you get to these places, and you think, how magnificent just to be here. You're a million miles from anywhere else. I'm surprised how many truckers there are here, except this is the season, all ages and from all over the world. And I love the Sherpas more than life. And the biggest kick I've had so far is seeing I brought all my junk in my son's hockey bag, this stinky number 13 Penguins bag. To see that going by past me on a yak, I just loved it. This is heaven.
We must be getting close to heaven because we are up so high. Here, concerns about hypoxia, pulmonary and cerebral edema, solar radiation, and frostbite become more serious. At least now scientists know a great deal more about the effects of altitude on the human body. The Chinese were the first to describe the effects of altitude. In a text from 35 BC, they wrote about Great Headache Mountain and Fever Slope, where men got headaches and vomited. Like breathless Greeks on Mount Olympus, they attributed it to the presence of gods in the mountains. It wasn't until the mid-1800s that the father of altitude physiology, the French scientist Paul Bert, explained that mountain sickness was due to lack of oxygen. And around the same time, early balloonists were soaring up almost to the summit of Mount Everest and passing out and sometimes dying. All the science about altitude sickness makes the people who live here even more interesting.
Why can he do that and we can't? The Sherpas.
We've been hiking for 6 days now, and the more time I spend with the Sherpas, the more I am in awe of them. I'm at just over 13,000 feet, and I'm feeling breathless and slow just carrying a backpack. Look at them.
We can learn all about their red blood cells and breathing patterns and oxygen delivery systems. But to see the Sherpas in action is something not to be believed, carrying chests of drawers and generators and cases of coke up thousands of meters with just this head strap. They're the transport trucks of this region. There isn't a car, an inch of paved road, or a wheel in 425 square miles. And as climbers, some of them have turned out to be exceptional. From Norgay's ascent with Hillary of Everest to Angalu's record-breaking 10-hour and 56-minute ascent last year. Unbelievable.
Galu is actually the head climbing Sherpa on the Discovery expedition. He and an army of Sherpas are accompanying us every step of the way. The Sherpa's fate is to walk in the mountains, and they are brilliantly adapted to it. Scientists are still finding new explanations for this. There are about 10,000 of them still living in the Khumbu Valley. Many people think the word Sherpa is a generic term for a faithful assistant or porter, but they are Nepal's most famous ethnic group. Most of them are named after the day of the week they were born, and they use the word Sherpa as their last name. So, someone born on Wednesday would be Lakpa Sherpa. Sunday, Nima Sherpa. A Sherpa was asked once if they will ever end up paving the roads in the Khumbu Valley. His answer was, if we rode a bus, would we still feel the steepness of our mountains? Would we still hear the waterfalls? Would we stop and say a prayer when we pass a Mani stone? We are Sherpas. We walk.
They are known for their sterling character, for their unbelievable work ethic and strength, and also for their mountaineering expertise. One of the surviving Sherpas from the Hillary expedition, though, said about the mountains that going to a mountain is like going to war. You don't know if you'll come back.
Ben Webster is very familiar with Sherpa decency and toughness. He's been to the top of Mount Everest with them.
Their strength is the most noteworthy of their characteristics up on the mountain, both mental strength as well as their physical strength. The combination is pretty much unbeatable up in the high mountains. The other thing that I think people don't realize is how committed they are to their profession. And they have tremendous pride in what they do. And I think that story is never told. We have a young guy that's with us that's done a number of expeditions with me, and he's probably the single strongest guy, pound for pound, I've ever met. I mean, his nickname was 70 kg because he used to carry loads that were 70 kg, which was probably his body weight or more at the time as a young kid. And he would do it where he was always the first one into camp with that much weight, with a smile on his face, and then he'd sit down and make us tea. And if you want to talk about just a horrible experience to drag yourself into camp, to have a guy waiting there after he's hauled up his own body weight, smiling, sort of saying, you know, what took you so long, with a cup of tea, quite an amazing thing.
I wanted to mention the kids. I've done a scientific study, and I think the Sherpa children are, without a doubt, the most beautiful in the world. They're absolutely enchanting.
So, what is it about Sherpas that help them live 2 miles above sea level? I asked another of my teammates, Lakpa Norbu Sherpa.
What about your breathing? Do you notice that your breathing's different than Westerners?
Yeah. I read a news a couple years ago, and they proved that the Sherpa people who lives in high altitude, they have in the long size, they have little bigger lung to catch the oxygen. So I think that's why it's a little easier for us, for Sherpas.
Are you amazed when you see the Sherpa porters? I mean, have you done that, carrying those loads?
Yeah.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I still remember it was my first trekking when I was carrying the cooking parts, like kitchen stuffs. Yeah, it's very difficult. It was very, very difficult for me. So I can feel how difficult for them too.
Sherpas are not immune to altitude sickness, and they also have to be careful. I range from being amazed and impressed to horrified and distressed by some of the loads I see Sherpa men and women carry. Gopal is the famous 70 kg Ben Webster talked about. I got him to show me how he does it.
Well, Gopal's been carrying this bag since Lukla, you know, thousands of meters uphill. This is somebody's gear in a hockey bag. I don't, and it carries it on his head. I go like this. Yeah. Yeah, and you lean forward. Okay.
Okay, Mom.
And then I walk. Gopal, how do you do this? How do you go up a hill? No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
You know what's interesting is that you need a strong neck. And okay, before I thought trekking was hard, now this is impossible. I mean, the Sherpas are the human transport trucks of the world. Oh God. Okay, Gopal. You know what? I can't do anymore.
My admiration is only increased. It is really hard. You know, if you ask a Sherpa how far it is from Lukla to Namche, they answer not in distance or altitude, but in time. Walking everywhere gives you a different outlook, and the Sherpas can teach you many lessons about patience. On Everest, a Sherpa once said to Edmund Hillary, "Some people travel only to look, while others come to see." I'd like to see.
So we're about 14,000 feet now. We've been coming up, up, up. The terrain, as you can see, is getting a lot more alpine and barren, and yet, you know, it's still really stark and beautiful. Have I mentioned the cold? Can I mention the cold? It's getting freezing. Like it snowed last night. There's ice on the ground. When we wake up, I can't even tell you how many clothes I've got on in my little sleeping bag. The nights are long, lots of card games and books, but it's quite a journey, and the solitude is something you never get again.
Am I feeling the lack of oxygen yet? Absolutely.
Huh. I am. Just hang on a second, I gotta catch my breath. Good little Sherpa. Oh God. Okay.
29 seconds. How do you feel?
I feel out of breath. How much do we know now about mountain sickness?
It's very easy to get out of breath just walking around camp. I have a tiny headache, but more importantly, I haven't showered in days, and the last one was stone cold.
It may seem a little shallow and vain, being at 15,500 feet on the way to Everest to be worrying about your hair, but you know, such is life, and the toilet facilities here are not fabulous. Shower facilities are really not fabulous, so I'm sort of reduced to this. I'm just gonna do a little Mount Everest hair washing, if I can, without freezing to death. Oh God, it's cold. Anyway, they heated up a little bit of water in the kitchen, which was really nice of them. So I'm just gonna try and get my hair clean a little bit. This is left over from when the hotels were actually providing shampoo. God, that seems like about 8 years ago. But they didn't have views like this. I'm gonna try not to get my clothes all wet. Or the little good luck necklace that the monks at Tingboche gave us. Okay, good. If I can just keep the dust down for one more day, then that's just swell. Okay.
I'll dry my hair in the wind while you get better acquainted with the yaks. They don't smell great, they raise clouds of dust, but they're very handy for carrying baggage, making yak cheese, and their dung is the fuel in most stoves. They are fleet-footed and nimble beyond belief on impossible trails, but don't piss them off on the downside of a trail or they will hip-check you into oblivion.
Yeah.
It's day 9, and I'm now making my way up the rocky Khumbu moraine. At the top of another hill, everyone pauses and grows silent. There are endless rows of Buddhist memorials, and people pay their respect.
This is definitely the most moving sight we've seen on the trek to Everest. It's quite a desolate place. It's called the Valley of the Chortens, and there are very simple stone memorials built to many Sherpas, some Westerners, who have died on Everest. It's an Everest cemetery, and they stand here as silent remembrances of how dangerous that mountain is. The lure to climb it is irresistible, but people have to remember that people die every year on that mountain, and all the climbers heading up to Everest have to pass through this place, and it must be very sobering.
They look like Inukshuks, and they go on and on. There are memorials for Scott Fisher and Rob Hall, who were both killed in the disaster of 1996 on Everest, as told in the best-selling book Into Thin Air. It's a place where all you hear are prayer flags flapping furiously in the wind, sending their messages to the gods. Now we're really close. The surprising thing is you still can't see Everest, and it is right there. You can't even see it from base camp. So, from a dusty town called Gorak Shep, the last stop before base camp, you find a little bit of extra energy and climb a hill called Kalapatar. And at just over 18,000 feet, you find what you've been seeking.
It's like a kid walking into a giant Gothic cathedral for the first time. You can reach out and touch these mountains, the Himalayas. They are so huge. After weeks of trekking and having the mountains lift your eyes and your spirits, this is the payoff. This is the Mother Goddess, the tallest place on the planet.
It's completely thrilling and unforgettable. The excitement makes you forget how tired and cold you are. And you also think you're almost at your goal, which is a bit of a mistake, as the final boulder-strewn trek over the Khumbu Glacier into base camp is the hardest yet. Walking up and down over those boulders is exhausting, and it's farther than I thought. I'd also always heard that the Everest trek was full of garbage, which I found not to be the case. This is the first thing you see when you walk into base camp, and the reality of where you actually are hits you.
This hideous wreck is a grim reminder of how dangerous flying up at this altitude is. This helicopter crash in 2003 killed 4 people. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been some remarkable rescues from high altitude. The highest ever in this region was at about 20,000 feet, just above the Icefall in 1996, when a Nepalese Air Force pilot rescued Beck Weathers.
If you did fly into Everest Base Camp from sea level, you'd be dead within a few hours. You've got half the oxygen, which is why you take your time to get here.
We are at base camp. We are at 17,600 feet. That's 1,300 feet higher than the highest permanent habitation in the world in Peru. We are higher than the peaks of any of the mountains in the Rockies in BC or Alberta. It's freezing here. I am certainly breathing faster. My heart rate is faster. I have more red blood cells, but we're feeling pretty good. A lot of the team members have lost weight. I can't tell if I have because I'm wearing about 8 layers of clothes, and I don't think I've seen my body in weeks.
I have an enormous sense of amazement and accomplishment, and my legs are in such great shape. But look around. It's pretty bleak, even if the tents and prayer flags of the different expeditions give it a festive air. It's a strange place for a holiday.
I'm living here for the next 5 days. How to describe this place, Everest Base Camp? It is surreal, this mini city built on a glacier. So you got 600 feet of ice beneath you, and these rocks, some of them the size of cars. You can barely get a tent down, find any flat ground. There's sort of yak poo all around. And yet, in spite of this and the discomfort, and I haven't even mentioned the toilets, It is sort of pure magic. You are right in the heart of it all, where the icefall comes, Everest tucked just behind the mountains there. You hear avalanches while you're sleeping. You wake up and peer in the morning and see just, it's almost like off a calendar, the light glinting off the snow on Pumori or something like that. It is quite the place. It's really one of the toughest places I've ever had to even exist for a couple of days, but it is one of the most amazing places I've ever seen, and I'm so glad I did.
In many ways, Base Camp is as technologically advanced as anywhere else. You can send emails, talk on a satellite phone. You can even send live video feeds.
It was such a great day. This is when we saw Everest.
But there is also a very low-tech side to Base Camp.
This is one thing I will not miss one bit. It's so hard to walk on these slippery dumb rocks. I feel like Gollum. I can't get my breath or my footing. And worst of all, I'm heading to the hideous toilet tent. I do this every morning. It's my least favorite thing. I will not miss this one bit. And you have to bring your own toilet paper. This is the toilet tent. As low-tech as it gets, it's a bucket sunk in a bunch of rocks that people use. And as we've mentioned, there are no utilities here. There's no sewage pipe to take this stuff away. So some poor soul at the end of the day has to seal this thing up, put it onto his back, and haul it down the mountain.
Enough of the spoiled brat. Let's get some perspective and look around here. All this was created around 50 million years ago when the Indian subcontinent crashed into Asia and created the Himalaya. Everest is still growing at the rate of about 4 millimeters a year. No one knew it was the tallest mountain until a British surveyor in 1856 from hundreds of miles away did the calculations and figured it out. It was named after the British Surveyor General George Everest. No one even thought of climbing it until about the 1920s.
The statistics are really interesting. Over 1,200 people have summited since 1953 by 15 different routes. The youngest was 16, the oldest 65. One person has slept at the summit, others have skied, paraglided, and snowboarded down the mountain. 175 people have died on that mountain. The very worst day was in 1996 when 8 people perished.
I'm not going any higher, but the rest of the team is. Before they can begin the climb, another Puja ceremony has to take place to bless the climbers and their equipment and appease the mountain. The Lama walks into base camp, and he's way older than I am. It's a wonderful tradition and a necessity for the Sherpas, whose Buddhist beliefs are the strongest. They will not set a foot on the mountain without asking for permission and safe passage from the gods.
The puja ceremony has just finished, which was wonderful to see, and they unfurl the prayer flags to send the good wishes up to the mountain. It's all about getting the blessing of the mountain for the climbers. Their equipment is blessed, things that they will eat are blessed, offerings are made, chanting is done. Everybody tosses rice into the air. It's actually joyous and somber and really important. And I've got a blessed little can of beer here. So I'll offer my good wishes with this. And now the climb begins.
To reach the summit of Everest, climbers must first make their way through the deadly Khumbu Icefall. It's a shifting glacier full of treacherous crevasses and falling towers of ice, and it's where the route to the top begins. I truly have no desire to try and conquer this mountain, but I would love to see what the icefall looks like. So the Sherpas take me to a safe section just for a peek.
This is the place that separates the yaks from the goats, the trekkers from the climbers. This is the Khumbu Icefall. And all that you've read about it and how dangerous and amazing and scary it is, it's still so beautiful. The colors of the ice, the blues and the whites, and actually a fascinating little piece of history as you see the little archaeological tidbits that are spat out by the glacier as it just tumbles down and into the valley.
It is a lacy wonderland, this deadly place I've read about in so many books. Sublime, awesome, Unbelievable. Psalm 72 says, "And the mountains shall also bring peace." There's no disappointment here. This is Shangri-La. And to tell you the truth, the greatest part of this entire adventure was being able to share it with my sister Lorna. She had dreamed all her life of walking in these mountains with the Sherpas and seeing the mighty Mount Everest. So we did it together, step by step through the Himalayas. And we'll never forget it.
Thrill of a century, thrill of a lifetime. One final stinky song. Got to get out of the bag.
I thought I'd emptied it of everything. My son's hockey bag has come with me to Everest Base Camp, and I took every stinky cup and jersey. There were hundreds in the bag. And I just went looking for batteries, and guess what? More garbage.